I'm just scared to death. And this icon in the user interface community walks up to me and just out of nowhere just gives me this huge bear hug. And he says, that was from Andy. And that was when I thought, OK, maybe I can make it. Right? Maybe I do belong. And a similar story is that this was just this unbelievable hit because at the time everybody needed $500,000 to do virtual reality and everybody felt frustrated. And we literally hacked together a system for about $5,000 in parts and made a working VR system. And people were just like, oh my God, this like, the Hewlett-Packard Garage thing, this is so awesome. And so I'm giving this talk and the room has just gone wild. And during the Q&A, a guy named Tom Furness, who was one of the big names in virtual reality at the time, he goes up to the microphone and he introduces himself. And I didn't know what he looked like, but I sure as hell knew the name. And he asked a question. And I was like, I'm sorry, did you say you're Tom Furness? And he said, yes. I said, then I would love to answer your question, but first, will you have lunch with me tomorrow? and there's a lot in that little moment, right? There's a lot of humility, but also asking a person where he can't possibly say no. And so Imagineering, a couple of years later, was working on a virtual reality project. This was top secret. They were denying the existence of a virtual reality attraction after the time that the publicity department was running the TV commercials. Okay, so Imagineering really had nailed this one tight. And it was the Aladdin attraction where you would fly a magic carpet. And the head-mounted display, sometimes known as Gator Vision. And so I had an in. As soon as the project had just, they started running the TV commercials. And I had been asked to brief the Secretary of Defense on the state of virtual reality. Okay, Fred Brooks and I had been asked to brief the Secretary of Defense. And that gave me an excuse. So I called them up. I called Imagineering, and I said, look, I'm briefing the Secretary of Defense. I'd like some materials on what you have, because it's one of the best VR systems in the world. And they kind of pushed back, and I said, look, is all this patriotism stuff in the parks a farce? And they're like, okay. They said, but the PR department doesn't, this is so new, the PR department doesn't have any footage for you, so I'm going to have to connect you straight through to the team who did the work. Jackpot. Right? So I find myself on the phone with a guy named John Snoddy, who is one of the most impressive guys I have ever met. And he was the guy running this team, and it's not surprising they had done impressive things. And so he sent me some stuff. We talked briefly. He sent me some stuff, and I said, hey, I'm going to be out in the area for a conference shortly. Would you like to get together and have lunch? Translation. I'm going to lie to you and say that I have an excuse to be in the area so I don't look too anxious. But I would go to Neptune to have lunch with you. And so John said, sure. And I spent something like 80 hours talking with all the VR experts in the world, saying, if you had access to this one unbelievable project, what would you ask? And then I compiled all of that, and I had to memorize it, which anybody who knows me knows that I have no memory at all, because I couldn't go in looking like a dweeb with, hi, question 72, right? So I went in, and this was like a 2-hour lunch, and John must have thought he was talking to, some phenomenal person, because all I was doing was channeling Fred Brooks and Ivan Sutherland and Andy Van Damme and people like that, and Henry Fuchs. So it's pretty easy to be smart when you're parroting smart people. And at the end of the lunch with John, I sort of, as we say in the business, made the ask. And I said, I have a sabbatical coming up. And he said, what's that? The beginnings of the culture clash. And so I talked to him about the possibility of coming there and working with him. And he said, well, that's really good, except, you're in the business of telling people stuff, and we're in the business of keeping secrets. Right? And then what made John Snoddy was he said, but we'll work it out. Right? Which I really loved. The other thing that I learned from John Snoddy, I could do easily an hour-long talk just on what have I learned from John Snoddy. One of the things he told me was that wait long enough and people will surprise and impress you. He said, when you're pissed off at somebody and you're angry at them, you just haven't given them enough time. Just give them a little more time, and they'll almost always impress you. And that really stuck with me. I think he's absolutely right on that one. To make a long story short, we negotiated a legal contract. It was going to be the first, some people referred to it as the first and last paper ever published by Imagineering. But the deal was I go, I provide my own funding, I go for 6 months, I work with a project, we publish a paper. And then we meet our villain. I can't be all sweetness and light because I have no credibility. Somebody's head's going to go on a stick. Turns out that the person who gets his head on the stick is a dean back at the University of Virginia. His name is not important. Let's call him Dean Wormer. And Dean Wormer has a meeting with me where I say I want to do this sabbatical thing, and I've actually gotten the Imagineering guys to let an academic in, which is insane. I mean, if John hadn't gone nuts, this would never have been a possibility. This is a very secretive organization. And Dean Wormer looks at the paperwork and he says, well, it says they're going to own your intellectual property. And I said, yeah, we got the agreement to publish the paper. There is no other IP. I don't do patentable stuff. And he says, yeah, but you might. So deal's off, and just get him to change that little clause there, and then come back to me. I'm like, excuse me? And then I said to him, I want you to understand how important this is. If we can't work this out, I'm going to take an unpaid leave of absence, and I'm just going to go there, and I'm going to do this thing. And he said, hey, you know, I might not even let you do that. I mean, you've got the IP in your head already, and maybe they're going to suck it out of you, so that's not going to fly either. It's very important to know when you're in a pissing match. And it's very important to get out of it as quickly as possible. So I said to him, well, let's back off on this. Do we think this is a good idea at all? He said, I have no idea if this is a good idea. I was like, okay, well, we've got common ground there. Then I said, well, is this really your call? Isn't this the call of the Dean of Sponsored Research, if it's an IP issue? And he said, yeah, that's true. I said, so if he's happy, you're happy? Yeah, then I'd be fine. Like Wile E. Coyote, a little. And I find myself in Gene Block's office, who's the most fantastic man in the world. And I start talking to Gene Block, and I say, let's start at the high level, since I don't want to have to back out again. So let's start at the high level. Do you think this is a good idea? He said, well, if you're asking me if it's a good idea, I don't have very much information. All I know is that one of my star faculty members is in my office, and he's really excited, so tell me more. Here's a lesson for everybody in administration. They both said the same thing. But think about how they said it. Right? I don't know. Well, I don't have much information, but one of my star faculty members is here, and he's all excited, so I want to learn more. They're both ways of saying I don't know, but boy, there's a good way and a bad way. So anyway, we got it all worked out. I went to Imagineering, sweetness and light, and all's well that ends well. Some brick walls are made of flesh. So I worked on the Aladdin project. It was absolutely spectacular. I mean, just unbelievable. Here's my nephew Christopher. This was the apparatus. You would sit on this sort of motorcycle type thing, and you would steer your magic carpet, and you would put on the head-mounted display. The head-mounted display was very interesting. It had two parts, and it was a very, very clever design. To get throughput through, the only part that touched the guest's head was this little cap, and everything else clicked onto it, all the expensive hardware. So you could replicate the caps because they were basically free to manufacture. And this is what I really did, as I was a cap cleaner during this sabbatical. I loved Imagineering. It was just a spectacular place. Just spectacular. Everything that I had dreamed. I love the model shop. People crawling around on things the size of this room that are just big physical models. It was just an incredible place to walk around and be inspired. I'm always reminded of when I went there and people said, do you think the expectations are too high? And I said, you ever see the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where Gene Wilder says to the little boy Charlie, he's about to give him the chocolate factory, he says, well, Charlie, did anybody ever tell you the story of the little boy who suddenly got everything he ever wanted? Charlie's eyes get like saucers, and he says, no, what happened to him? Gene Wilder says, he lived happily ever after. Okay, so working on the Aladdin VR, I described it as a once in every 5 years opportunity, and I stand by that assessment. It forever changed me. It wasn't just that it was good work and I got to be a part of it, but it got me into the place of working with real people and real HCI, user interface issues. Most HCI people live in this fantasy world of white-collar laborers with PhDs and master's degrees, and until you got ice cream spilled on you, you're not doing field work, right? And more than anything else, from John Snoddy, I learned how to put artists and engineers together, and that's been the real legacy. We published a paper, just a nice academic cultural scandal. When we wrote the paper, the guys at Imagineering said, well, let's do a nice big picture, like you would in a magazine. And the SIGGRAPH committee, which accepted the paper, it was like this big scandal. Are they allowed to do that? There was no rule. So we published the paper, and amazingly, since then, there's a tradition of SIGGRAPH papers having color figures on the first page. So I've changed the world in a small way. And then at the end of my 6 months, they came to me and they said, "You want to do it for real? You can stay." And I said no. One of the only times in my life I have surprised my father. He was like, "You what?" He said, "Since you were, all you wanted, and now they got it," and you're like, "Huh?" There was a bottle of Maalox in my desk drawer. Be careful what you wish for. It was a particularly stressful place. Imagineering in general is actually not so Maalox-laden, but the lab I was in, John left in the middle. And it was a lot like the Soviet Union. It was a little dicey for a while. But it worked out okay. And if they had said, "Stay here or never walk in the building again," I would have done it. I would have walked away from tenure. I would have just done it. But they made it easy on me. They said, "You can have your cake and eat it too." And I basically become a day a week consultant for Imagineering, and I did that for about 10 years. And that's one of the reasons you should all become professors. Right? Because you can have your cake and eat it too. Okay? I went on and consulted on things like Disney Quest, so there was the Virtual Jungle Cruise, and the best interactive experience I think ever done, and Jesse Schell gets the credit for this, Pirates of the Caribbean. Wonderful at Disney Quest. And so those are my childhood dreams. And, that's pretty good. I felt good about that. So then the question becomes, how can I enable the childhood dreams of others? And again, boy, am I glad I became a professor. What better place to enable childhood dreams? Maybe working at EA, I don't know. That'd probably be a good close second. But, and this started in a very concrete realization that I could do this. Because a young man named Tommy Burnett, when I was at the University of Virginia, came to me, was interested in joining my research group. And we talked about it. And he said, "Oh, and I have a childhood dream." Well, it gets pretty easy to recognize them when they tell you. And I said, "Yes, Tommy, what is your childhood dream?" He said, "I want to work on the next Star Wars film." Now, you got to remember the timing on this. Where is Tommy? Tommy is here today. What year would this have been? Your sophomore year? Oh.
It was around 1993.
Are you breaking anything back there, young man? Okay, all right. So in 1993, and I said to Tommy, "They're probably not going to make those next movies." And he said, "No, they are." And Tommy worked with me for a number of years as an undergraduate and then as a staff member. And then when I moved to Carnegie Mellon, every single member of my team came from Virginia to Carnegie Mellon, except for Tommy, because he got a better offer. And he did indeed work on all 3 of those films. And then I said, well, that's nice, but, one at a time is kind of inefficient. And people who know me know that I'm an efficiency freak. So I said, can I do this in mass? Can I get people turned in such a way that they can be turned on to their childhood dreams? And I created a course. I came to Carnegie Mellon, and I created a course called Building Virtual Worlds. It's a very simple course. How many people here have ever been to any of the shows? Okay, so some of you have an idea. For those of you who don't, the course is very simple. There are 50 students drawn from all the different departments of the university. There are randomly chosen teams, 4 people per team, and they change every project. A project only lasts 2 weeks, so you do something, you make something, you show something, then I shuffle the teams, you get 3 new playmates, and you do it again. And it's every 2 weeks, and so you do 5 projects during the semester. The first year we taught this course, it is impossible to describe how much of a tiger by the tail we had. I was just running the course because I wanted to see if we could do it. We had just learned how to do texture mapping on 3D graphics, and we could make stuff that looked half decent, but we were running on really weak computers by current standards. But I said, I'll give it a try. And at my new university, I made a couple of phone calls, and I said, I want to cross-list this course to get all these other people. And within 24 hours, it was cross-listed in 5 departments. I love this university. I mean, it's the most amazing place. And I said, and the kids said, well, what content do we make? I said, hell, I don't know. You make whatever you want. 2 rules: no shooting violence and no pornography. Not because I'm opposed to those in particular, but that's been done with VR, right? And you'd be amazed how many 19-year-old boys are completely out of ideas when you take those off the table. Anyway, so I taught the course. The first assignment, I gave it to them. They came back in 2 weeks, and they just blew me away. I mean, the work was so beyond, literally, my imagination. Because I'd copied the process from Imagineering's VR lab, but I had no idea what they could or couldn't do with it as undergraduates and how, because their tools were weaker. And they came back in the first assignment, and they did something that was so spectacular that I literally did 10 years as a professor, and I had no idea what to do next. So I called up my mentor. I called up Andy Van Dam. And I said, Andy, I just gave a 2-week assignment, and they came back and did stuff that if I'd given them a whole semester, I would have given them all A's. Sensei, what do I do? And Andy thought for a minute, and he said, you go back into class tomorrow, and you look them in the eye, and you say, guys, that was pretty good, but I know you can do better. And that was exactly the right advice, because what he said was, you obviously don't know where the bar should be, and you're only going to do them a disservice by putting it anywhere. And boy, was that good advice, because they just kept going. And during that semester, it became this underground thing. I'd walk into a class with 50 students in it, and there were 95 people in the room. Because it was the day we were showing work. And people's roommates and friends and parents. I'd never had parents come to class before. It was flattering and somewhat scary. And so it snowballed, and we had this bizarre thing of, we got to share this. If there's anything I've been raised to do, it's to share. And I said, we got to show this at the end of the semester. We got to have a big show. And we booked this room, Economy. I have a lot of good memories in this room. And we booked it not because we thought we could fill it, but because it had the only AV setup that would work, because this was a zoo. Right, computers and everything. And then we filled it. And we more than filled it. We had people standing in the aisle. I will never forget the dean at the time, Jim Morris, was sitting on the stage right about there. We had to kind of scoot him out of the way. And the energy in the room was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. And President Cohen, Jerry Cohen, was there, and he sensed the same thing. He later described it as like an Ohio State football pep rally, except for academics. And he came over and he asked exactly the right question. He said, before you start, he said, I got to know, where are these people from? He said, the audience. What departments are they from? And we polled them, and it was all the departments. And I felt very good because I had just come to campus, he had just come to campus, and my new boss had seen in a very corporal way that this is the university that puts everybody together. And that made me feel just tremendous. So we did this campus-wide exhibition. People perform down here. They're in costume, and we project just like this, and you can see what's going on. You can see what they're seeing in the head mount. There's a lot of big props. So there's a guy whitewater rafting. This is Ben and E.T. And yes, I did tell them if they didn't do the shot of the kids biking across the moon, I would fail him. That is a true story. And I thought I'd show you just... So I thought I'd show you just one world. And if we can get the lights down, if that's at all possible. No. Okay, that means no. All right. All right, we'll just do our best then.
Oh, hello there. I'm lonely. Make me a world.
Now they're going to turn this on its head. Watch closely. The world doesn't want to go on to the next thing in the show. So she's ready to move on, and it's not.
What are you doing? Can't end this now.
But there are so many other worlds that have to go.
But our world is the best world. Hey, no! Here I am!
We're gonna shut you down. Control Alt Delete.
Not Control Alt Delete. You left us. You left us. My skin is We love you.
It was an unusual course with some of the most brilliant, creative students from all across the campus. It just was a joy to be involved with. And they took the whole stage performance aspect of this way too seriously. And it became this campus phenomenon every year. People would line up for it. It was very flattering. And it gave kids a sense of excitement of putting on a show for people who were then excited about it. And I think that that's one of the best things you can give somebody, the chance to show them what it feels like to make other people get excited and happy. I mean, that's a tremendous gift. We always tried to involve the audience, whether it was people with glow sticks or batting a beach ball around or driving. This is really cool. This technology actually got used at the Spider-Man 3 premiere in LA, so the audience was controlling something on the screen. So that's kind of nice. And I don't have a class picture from every year, but I dredged all the ones that I do have. And all I can say is that what a privilege and an honor it was to teach that course for something like 10 years. And all good things come to an end, and I stopped teaching that course about a year ago. People always ask me, what was my favorite moment? I don't know if you could have a favorite moment, but boy, there's one I'll never forget. This was a world with, I believe, a roller skating ninja. And one of the rules was that we performed these things live, and they all had to really work, and the moment it stopped working, we went to your backup videotape. And this was very embarrassing. So we have this ninja on stage, and he's doing this roller skating thing, and the world, it did not crash gently. And I come out, and I believe it was Steve Audio, wasn't it? Was it? Where is he? Okay, where's Steve? Ah, my man, Steve Audio. And talk about quick on your feet, right? I say, Steve, I'm sorry, but your world has crashed, and we're going to go to videotape. And he pulls out his ninja sword and says, I am dishonored! Wah! And just drops. And so I think it's very telling that my favorite moment in 10 years of this high technology course was a brilliant ad lib. And then when the videotape is done and the lights come up, he's lying there lifeless and his teammates drag him off. It was really a fantastic moment. And the course was all about bonding. People used to say, well, you know, what's going to make for a good world? I said, I can't tell you beforehand, but right before they present it, I can tell you if the world's good just by the body language. If they're standing close to each other, the world is good. All right? And BVW was a pioneering course. And I won't bore you with all the details, but it wasn't easy to do. And I was given this when I stepped down from the ETC, and I think it's emblematic. If you're going to do anything that's pioneering, you will get those arrows in the back, and you just have to put up with it. I mean, everything that could go wrong did go wrong, but at the end of the day, a whole lot of people had a whole lot of fun. When you've had something for 10 years that you hold so precious, it's the toughest thing in the world to hand it over. And the only advice I can give you is find somebody better than you to hand it to. And that's what I did. There was this kid at the VR studio way back when. And you didn't have to spend very long in Jesse Schell's orbit to go, the force is strong in this one. And one of my two greatest accomplishments, I think, for Carnegie Mellon were that I got Jessica Hodgins and Jesse Schell to come here and join our faculty. And I was thrilled when I could hand this over to Jesse. And to no one's surprise, he has really taken it up to the next notch. And the course is in more than good hands, it's in better hands. But it was just one course. And then we really took it up a notch. And we created what I would call the Dream Fulfillment Factory. Don Marinelli and I got together, and with the university's blessing and encouragement, we made this thing out of whole cloth that was absolutely insane, should never have been tried. All the